An Amish widow said, "My cabin only has one bed." The mountain man looked at her, bleeding from a railroad bullet, and whispered, "I don't mind." A storm raged outside. Inside, a woman of faith was forced to share her home with a stranger carrying secrets that could burn the whole valley. He wasn't just any mountain man. He was hunted by men who had already cheated native families of their wages and now wanted blood. But this widow carried a secret of her own, a stepdaughter the town scorned for her Arapaho blood. And when railroad men rode in with fire and threats, both woman and child stood on the edge of losing everything. One cabin, one widow, one outlaw of justice, a family no one expected, free, forged by faith, fire, and danger. When the snow clears, will they find mercy in each other's arms, or be torn apart by the men who want them dead? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Through the howling Colorado wind, Sophia Hochstetler pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and peered out the cabin's frost-rimmed window. The blizzard had arrived fierce and sudden, like God's own breath turning the foothills white. Her woodpile, already smaller than she'd like, sat half buried in the growing drifts. The cabin's familiar creaks seemed louder in the gathering dusk. The single room felt both too empty and too full. Empty of the family she'd lost, but full of memories that whispered in the shadows. Her late husband's chair still held its place by the hearth, though 2 winters had passed since his passing. Sophia moved to add another log to the struggling fire, her plain dress rustling as she knelt. The flames caught slowly, casting dancing light across the simple furnishings. The well-worn table, the single bed with its carefully pieced quilts, the shelf holding her Bible and few books. The thud on her porch came sudden and heavy, nearly lost in a particularly fierce gust of wind. Sophia froze, her heart jumping to her throat. In all her years on the frontier, she'd learned to be cautious of unexpected visitors, especially in weather that drove most sensible folk indoors. "Lord, grant me wisdom," she whispered, reaching for her lantern. The oil lamp's warm glow steadied her nerves as she approached the door. Another thud, weaker this time, followed by what sounded like a groan. Sophia drew back the bolt with trembling fingers and pulled the door open against the wind's resistance. Snow swirled into the cabin, bringing with it a blast of bitter cold that made the lantern flame dance wildly. There, sprawled across her porch, lay a man larger than any she'd ever seen. His buckskin jacket was dark with blood on one shoulder, his face half buried in the gathering snow. He stirred slightly, a low moan escaping his lips. "Herr im Himmel," Sophia breathed, setting the lantern down. She couldn't leave him to freeze, no matter what trouble he might bring. Her Amish faith taught that every life was precious in God's eyes. Getting him inside proved a mighty challenge. Though she was strong from years of working her small homestead, the man's bulk seemed impossible at first. Sophia grabbed him under the arms, her boots scraping against the wooden porch as she pulled with all her might. Inch by inch, she managed to drag him across the threshold. By the time she had him positioned near the hearth, sweat dampened her cap despite the cold air still flowing through the open door. Sophia quickly closed it against the storm, then turned her attention to her unexpected guest. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with a strong jaw covered in several days' growth of beard. A long scar ran from his left temple into his hairline. Even unconscious, there was something fierce about his features, like a sleeping bear might look. "Sir?" she tried, touching his uninjured shoulder. "Can you hear me?" His eyes flickered open briefly, striking blue eyes that seemed to pierce right through her before closing again. His lips moved, but whatever he said was lost in the howl of the wind outside. Sophia worked quickly, gathering her supplies. She kept her medical chest well stocked with simple remedies: yarrow for bleeding, witch hazel for cleaning wounds, honey for preventing infection. These were the ways of her people, passed down through generations. The bullet had only grazed his shoulder, thank the Lord, though it had torn a nasty furrow through flesh and muscle. As she cleaned the wound, her patient drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes muttering words she couldn't quite catch. "I'm sorry," she said softly as she worked, not sure if he could hear her. "My cabin only has one bed." His eyes opened again, fever bright in the firelight. "I don't mind," he whispered, before slipping back into his restless state. Sophia finished binding his shoulder with clean linen strips, then covered him with several quilts she'd made herself. The storm continued its assault on the cabin, making the shutters rattle like dry bones. She added more wood to the fire, precious though it was. The man needed warmth to fight off fever. As she worked, questions tumbled through her mind like leaves in an autumn wind. Who had shot him? Would they come looking? Her isolated cabin had always felt safe before, but now the darkness beyond her window seemed to hold watching eyes. The man's fever grew worse as the evening deepened. Sophia bathed his forehead with cool cloths, whispering prayers in both English and Pennsylvania Dutch. His sighs made him seem indestructible, yet she could feel death's shadow hovering, waiting to see if this soul would be claimed. Near midnight, as Sophia sat at her table reading her Bible by lamplight, his voice rose suddenly from the nest of quilts. "Railroad men," he growled, the words slurred but distinct. "Betrayed us all. The Arapaho workers. Blood money." Sophia's hands tightened on her Bible. Railroad disputes had brought violence to these hills before. If this man had stood against the powerful railroad companies, his enemies would be dangerous indeed. She studied him in the dim light. This stranger Providence had dropped at her door. His face was troubled even in sleep, as if fighting battles in his dreams. The wind moaned around the cabin's corners and snow continued to fall, building drifts that would soon make travel impossible. Sophia knew her duty as a Christian was clear. Regardless of what troubles this man might bring, she would tend him until he healed, and trust in the Lord's protection. Still, she found herself glancing more often at the door, checking that the bolt was secure. The man's fever began to break in near dawn. His breathing grew more regular and his skin felt cooler to her touch. Sophia finally allowed herself to rest in her husband's old chair, though she kept her shawl close around her shoulders. The fire had burned low, but she was too tired to add more wood. As the first weak light of morning began to filter through the storm clouds, Sophia found herself studying her patient's face again. There was something about him that spoke, of long loneliness, of burdens carried far and hard. She recognized that look. She'd seen it in her own mirror often enough since becoming a widow. The storm showed no signs of lessening. Snow continued to fall in thick curtains and the wind still howled its wild song. Sophia knew they might be trapped together for days, this strange, wounded man and herself. The thought should have frightened her more than it did. Instead, she felt an odd sense of purpose, as if God had sent her this task for reasons she couldn't yet understand. Her people believed in signs and providence. In the subtle ways the Lord worked his will through seemingly random events. "Dear Father," she prayed softly, her words barely audible above the storm. "Grant me strength for whatever path you have set before me. And please," she added, glancing at the sleeping stranger, "let me have chosen rightly in helping this man." The cabin grew lighter as morning progressed, though the storm's gray pall made time difficult to measure. Sophia moved quietly about her daily tasks, banking the fire, preparing simple porridge, checking on her patient's bandages. The ordinary routine helped settle her nerves, though questions still churned in her mind. Who was this man? What battles had he fought? And most worrying of all, what dangers might follow him to her door once the storm cleared? The wind rattled the shutters again as if in answer to her unspoken fears. Sophia straightened her shoulders and touched the Bible lying on her table. She was an Amish widow, alone, but not defenseless. She had her faith, her wit, and the strength that came from surviving hard times. Whatever trouble this stranger might bring, she would face it with prayer and courage. For now, the storm had brought them together, and she would do what needed doing. That was the way of her people. One step at a time, one day at a time, trusting in God's plan even when the path ahead was hidden in shadow. The storm raged through the night, its fury undiminished. Sophia dozed fitfully in her husband's old chair, waking at every moan from her injured guest. The darkness before dawn found her already moving about the cabin, adding wood to the banked coals and wrapping her heavy shawl tight against the chill. Morning brought no relief from the storm. Snow continued to fall in thick curtains, and the wind howled around the cabin's corners like a hungry wolf. Sophia pulled on her boots and warmest coat, knowing her animals wouldn't wait for better weather to be fed. The short walk to the barn was a battle against the elements. Snow had drifted nearly waist-high in places, and the bitter wind cut through her clothes like knives of ice. Inside the barn, her cow Sarah lowed a greeting, breath steaming in the cold air. The familiar routine of morning chores steadied Sophia's spirit. Measuring feed, fresh hay in the manger, the rhythm of milk streaming into her pail. When she returned to the cabin, her cheeks burning from the cold, she found her patient stirring. His blue eyes opened, clearer now without the fever's haze. But confusion clouded his face as he took in the plain furnishings and simple decor. "Where am I?" His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. Sophia set down her milk pail and removed her coat before answering. "Thee is safe," she said, using the plain speech of her people. "I found thee collapsed on my porch last evening during the storm." He tried to push himself up, then fell back with a grunt of pain. "Your porch?" His eyes swept the cabin again, taking in the unadorned walls, the absence of decorative items. "This is an Amish home." "Yes," Sophia confirmed, moving to check his bandages. "I am Sophia Hochstetler. We live simply here as our faith teaches. Now lie still, the wound is not deep, but thee has lost blood and needs rest." "Asher," he muttered. "Asher Boone." Another attempt to rise ended in failure. "Much obliged for your help, Mrs. Hochstetler, but I should be moving on." "In this storm? Thee would not make it 100 yards. Sophia shook her head firmly. "The Lord brought thee to my door, Mr. Boone, and here thee will stay until strong enough to travel safely." While he digested this, Sophia bustled about preparing breakfast. She sliced fresh bread, still warm from yesterday's baking, and poured fresh milk into 2 cups. The familiar tasks helped calm her nerves about sharing her home with this strange man. Setting his portion on a small table near the hearth, she fixed him with a steady gaze. "I expect honesty, Mr. Boone. Who shot thee, and why?" Asher struggled to sit up enough to eat, his face tightening with pain. "Railroad men," he said finally, between bites of bread. "Caught their foreman cheating the Arapaho workers of their wages. Been hiring them for the new line, promising fair pay, then finding excuses to dock their earnings or pay nothing at all." Sophia's hands stilled on her own bread. "And thee spoke against this?" "More," then spoke. A shadow crossed his weathered face. "Caught him burning their work records, confronted him about it. Things got heated. Now his men are hunting me, claiming I stole company funds." He gave a bitter laugh. "The real thieves are the ones with clean suits and fancy offices." Sophia felt her heart sink. She had hoped for a simple explanation, but this was the kind of trouble that didn't blow over like a summer storm. The railroad companies were powerful, their influence reaching far beyond the steel rails they laid across the territory. The sound of the door opening interrupted her worried thoughts. Miriam stood in the doorway, her arms full of kindling, snow dusting her dark hair and plain dress. The girl froze at the sight of the stranger by the hearth, her eyes widening with surprise and fear. "Come in quickly, child," Sophia called, moving to help close the door against the wind. "This is Mr. Boone." He was injured and needed shelter from the storm. Miriam set down her burden of wood carefully, her movements precise and controlled as she studied their guest. At 12 years old, she had already learned caution from a world that often judged her for her mixed heritage. Her Amish father had married her Arapaho mother against both communities' wishes, and though both were now gone, their daughter carried the weight of that choice in every careful step between 2 worlds. "This is my stepdaughter, Miriam," Sophia explained to Asher. She saw his gaze sharpen with interest as he noted the girl's features, the blend of her parents' bloodlines evident in her face. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Miriam," he said softly, his gruff voice gentling. The girl nodded but didn't speak, moving to help Sophia prepare their evening meal. The rest of the day passed quietly, marked by the continuing storm and the comfortable routine of household tasks. Sophia tended to Asher's wound, prepared simple foods, and worked on her mending while Miriam practiced her letters at the table. The girl kept stealing glances at their guest, her natural curiosity warring with her taught caution. As evening drew near, Sophia lit the lamps and set out their supper, a humble meal of bean soup and cornbread. Miriam helped Asher sit up properly, showing unexpected strength for her size. The three ate in comfortable silence, broken only by the storm's constant voice and the clink of spoons against bowls. Sophia watched them both, her heart troubled. Asher's presence brought danger to their door, yet she couldn't regret helping him. His stand against injustice, especially in defense of native workers, spoke to something deep in her soul. Had not her late husband taken a similar stand, choosing love over the comfortable approval of their community? Still, fear nibbled at the edges of her thoughts. The railroad companies were not known for mercy to those who opposed them. If their men tracked Asher here, would they show any consideration for an Amish widow and her mixed-blood stepdaughter? When the meal was finished, Sophia bowed her head in their customary evening prayer. "Dear Lord," she whispered, conscious of both Miriam's and Asher's quiet presence, "guide our steps in these uncertain times. Grant us wisdom to know thy will and courage to follow it. Protect those who stand against injustice and help us to be worthy of thy grace. Amen." The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters as if in answer to her prayer. Sophia looked up to find Asher watching her with an unreadable expression, while Miriam methodically cleared away their supper dishes. The lamplight cast warm shadows on the cabin's plain walls, and for a moment, the scene felt almost peaceful. A false peace, perhaps, like the eye of a storm. But for now, they were safe and warm. Three souls brought together by circumstance and providence. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, Sophia chose to trust in the Lord's guidance. After all, had he not taught that caring for the stranger and standing up for the oppressed were holy duties? Still, as she helped Miriam prepare for bed, she couldn't help wondering what price they might all pay for offering shelter to a man who had dared to challenge the powerful. The storm's voice seemed to carry whispers of dangers yet to come, and Sophia found herself praying more fervently than ever for protection and guidance. Morning light crept through the frosted window panes, casting pale squares on the cabin's wooden floor. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine blanket of snow that sparkled in the dawn. Inside, the cabin was warm from the freshly stoked fire, filled with the gentle sounds of morning routine. Sophia knelt beside Asher's makeshift bed near the hearth, carefully unwrapping his bandages. "Hold still," she instructed, her firm tone brooking no argument. "The wound needs cleaning." Asher grimaced but complied. "I should be up and about," he protested, trying to push himself to a sitting position. "Can't lie here like a useless log while you two ladies do all the work." "Thee will do exactly that until I say otherwise," Sophia replied, pressing him back down with surprising strength. "The bullet may have only grazed thee, but the wound is deep enough. Moving too soon will only make it worse." From her perch on a nearby chair, Miriam watched the exchange with wide eyes, her half-finished knitting forgotten in her lap. The needles caught the morning light, making tiny flashes as her hands fidgeted with the yarn. Asher noticed her attention and offered a gentle smile. "What's your name again, little miss?" "Don't believe I caught it properly yesterday." Miriam glanced at Sophia, who nodded encouragingly. "Miriam," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Miriam Hochstetler." "That's a fine name," Asher replied, wincing slightly as Sophia applied a fresh poultice to his wound. "Strong name with history behind it." Sophia's hand stilled for a moment. She looked at her stepdaughter, then back at Asher, something unspoken passing through her mind. Finally, she spoke, her voice careful and measured. "Miriam carries more history than just her name," she said quietly. "My late husband, Jacob, was married before me. Miriam's mother was Arapaho." Understanding dawned in Asher's eyes as he looked at the girl again, seeing now what he had only glimpsed before, the proud set of her cheekbones, the deep wisdom in her dark eyes. Miriam ducked her head, as if expecting judgment or rejection. "The community," Sophia continued, her hand steady as she wrapped fresh bandages around Asher's wound. "They whisper. Some say Jacob betrayed our ways by marrying outside the faith. Even now, years after both her parents have passed, Miriam bears the weight of their disapproval." "Look at me, Miriam," Asher said gently. The girl raised her eyes hesitantly. "You have nothing to be ashamed of. Your blood carries the strength of two proud peoples, the steadfast faith of the Amish and the ancient wisdom of the Arapaho. That's something to hold your head high about." Color rose in Miriam's cheeks, and for the first time, a small smile touched her lips. Her fingers resumed their work on the knitting, moving with new purpose. The day passed slowly, marked by the regular rhythm of household tasks. Sophia baked bread, fed the animals, and checked on Asher's wound. Miriam helped where she could, moving between them with quiet grace. As evening approached, Sophia stirred a pot of rabbit stew hanging over the fire. The savory aroma filled the cabin, making their mouths water. When they gathered around the table, Asher properly sitting up for the first time, Sophia's face grew. "Serious. There's something else these should know," she said, ladling stew into their bowls. "The elders, they've shunned me." Asher's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "For raising Miriam?" Sophia nodded, her eyes fixed on her bowl. "They said I was embracing wickedness by keeping her, that I should send her to live with her mother's people." Her voice grew fierce. "But I promised Jacob I would care for her as my own. She is my daughter in all ways. Yabi, that matter." "That's a heavy burden to bear," Asher said quietly, "being cast out by your own folk." "The Lord guides my path," Sophia replied, though her voice wavered slightly. "Even when others cannot understand it." Miriam reached across the table and squeezed her stepmother's hand, a gesture of love that needed no words. After supper, Asher's gaze drifted to the window, where the woodpile was visible in the gathering dusk. "That stack's getting mighty low," he observed. "Once I'm back on my feet, I'll chop enough to last you ladies through winter." Sophia followed his gaze, concern crossing her face. "Thee is kind to offer, but that wound will take time to heal properly. I don't want to see thee swinging an axe too soon." "We'll see about that," Asher replied with a hint of stubbornness. Outside, snow began to fall again, fat flakes drifting past the windows in the dying light. Sophia lit the lamps, their warm glow creating a cozy atmosphere inside the cabin. They gathered near the hearth, Sophia with her mending, Asher in the chair he'd insisted on moving to, and Miriam sitting cross-legged on the floor. The girl's eyes kept straying to the knife on Asher's belt, a beautiful piece with an intricately carved handle. Finally, she scooted closer to his chair, her natural curiosity overcoming her shyness. "Did you make that?" she asked, pointing to the knife. Asher smiled, carefully drawing it from its sheath. "No, this was a gift from an old Arapaho friend. See these markings?" He held it where she could see the carvings clearly. Each one tells a story. Miriam leaned in, fascination plain on her face as Asher began explaining the meanings of the various symbols. Sophia watched them from her chair, her needle moving steadily through the fabric in her lap. Something warm and unexpected bloomed in her chest at the sight of her usually reserved stepdaughter opening up to their guest. The knife's polished handle caught the lamplight as Asher turned it, showing Miriam how the patterns flowed into each other. Her dark eyes shone with interest, reflecting both the physical light and a deeper inner glow of connection. Recognition, perhaps, of someone who understood what it meant to stand between worlds. Snow continued to fall outside, but inside the cabin, three souls found an unexpected moment of peace, bound together by shared understanding of what it meant to live outside society's neat boundaries. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls, while Asher's deep voice wove stories about the knife's markings, and Miriam drank in every word. Days melted into each other like snow dripping from icicles. The morning routine became a gentle dance between the cabin's three inhabitants. Dawn would break over the Colorado foothills, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of rose and gold, and Sophia would rise first, her quiet footsteps marking time as she prepared for the day's tasks. The cow's soft lowing drew her to the barn each morning, where the familiar rhythm of milking offered moments of peaceful reflection. Her strong hands worked in practiced motions while her mind wandered to their unusual situation. The fresh milk filled her pail with a steady stream, its sweet scent rising in the cool air. Miriam had taken to rising early too, eager to tend to her own responsibilities. She moved among the chickens with gentle confidence, her dark hair tucked neatly beneath her bonnet as she scattered feed and gathered eggs. The birds had grown so used to her presence that they barely stirred when she reached beneath them to check their nests. Inside the cabin, Asher's recovery progressed slowly but steadily. His color improved with each passing day, and his appetite returned with surprising force. Sophia found herself baking bread more frequently, the cabin often filled with its comforting aroma. "The Lord provides," she would say, setting fresh loaves on the table, even if he sometimes provides more mouths to feed than expected. One crisp morning, while Sophia was hanging laundry on the line, she heard the distinctive thunk of an axe splitting wood. Her heart jumped into her throat as she rushed around the corner of the cabin. There stood Asher, shirt damp with sweat despite the winter chill, determinedly working his way through a pile of logs. Several split pieces already lay scattered around his feet. "What does thee think thee's doing?" Sophia demanded, hurrying toward him. "Thee's in no condition for such work." Asher paused, leaning on the axe handle. "Ma'am, I've been eating your food and taking up space in your home for days now. Least I can do is make myself useful." He straightened up, trying to hide a wince. "Besides, that woodpile's getting mighty low." "And now thy wound is bleeding again," Sophia observed sharply, pointing to the growing red stain on his shirt. "Inside. Now." For a moment, Asher looked like he might argue, but something in Sophia's stern expression made him think better of it. He followed her into the cabin, where she made him sit while she gathered her medical supplies. "Stubborn man," she muttered, unwrapping his bandages. "The Lord gave us sense enough to heal before working, did he not?" "Never was much good at sitting still," Asher admitted, grimacing as she cleaned the reopened wound. "Feels wrong, letting you two do all the work." "There's no shame in accepting help when needed," Sophia replied, her touch gentle despite her exasperation. "Pride can be as dangerous as any bullet." That evening, as they sat around the fire after supper, Asher seemed determined to make up for his earlier transgression. He began telling stories of his adventures in the Rockies, his deep voice painting vivid pictures of towering peaks and hidden valleys. "There was this one elk," he said, gesturing with his hands. "Biggest creature I'd ever seen. Rack of antlers like the branches of an old oak tree. I tracked him for 3 days through the high country, sleeping under the stars, eating jerky and wild berries." Miriam sat cross-legged on the floor, completely enthralled. "Did you catch him?" "Well now." Asher leaned forward, his eyes twinkling. "Just when I thought I had him cornered in this little box canyon, that clever old bull led me straight into a patch of wild raspberry bushes. There I was, tangled up in thorns, and that elk just stood there watching me, calm as you please. I swear he was laughing." Miriam's laughter burst forth, bright and unexpected as spring water from mountain snow. The sound filled the cabin, bouncing off the walls and touching something deep in Sophia's heart. She couldn't remember the last time she'd heard her stepdaughter laugh so freely, but the lightness of the moment shifted when Miriam asked about the railroad workers. Asher's face grew serious, the firelight casting deep shadows across his features. They were good men, he said quietly. Strong backs, skilled hands. Could drive spikes faster and truer than any other crew on the line. But that foreman, his jaw tightened. He kept changing the counts, marking down fewer ties laid, fewer miles completed. When payday came, he'd hand them half what they'd earned, sometimes less. "That's stealing," Miriam said, her young face solemn. "That's exactly what it was," Asher agreed. When I spoke up about it, showed him my own counts that proved what they'd done, he just laughed. Said nobody'd take an Indian's word over his Z's. His hand unconsciously touched his healing wound. I didn't start that fight, but I surely finished it. Left him nursing a broken jaw and a few other complaints. Now I reckon he's looking to settle the score. Sophia's hands stilled in her mending, her thoughts turning to the next day's tasks. The creek wasn't far from the cabin, and they needed water daily. She'd have to check it in the morning, as always. The following afternoon, as she made her way back from the creek with her water buckets, something caught her eye. There, in a patch of undisturbed snow, were hoof prints she didn't recognize. They weren't from her own horse, or any of the neighbors. She knew. Multiple sets of tracks suggested several riders had passed nearby. Her heart beat faster as she hurried back to the cabin. Inside, Miriam was helping Asher with his bandages, chattering about the chickens' antics. Their easy companionship, which had warmed her heart just that morning, now filled her with worry. At supper, Sophia served their usual simple fare: beans, cornbread, and the last of the rabbit stew. She said nothing about the tracks, not wanting to frighten Miriam or worry Asher when he was still healing. But her eyes kept straying to the window, searching the gathering darkness for movement. Later, after Miriam had gone to bed and Asher had settled in his makeshift bed by the hearth, Sophia found herself unable to sleep. The strange tracks weighed heavy on her mind. Finally, she lit a small lamp and knelt beside her bed. "Lord," she whispered, her hands clasped tightly together, "I need thy guidance. Was it thy mercy or my mistake that led me to bring this man into our home?" She paused, listening to the quiet crackle of the dying fire. "I acted out of charity, but have I brought danger to my door? To Miriam?" Her voice caught slightly. "Please show me the path of righteousness. Give me the wisdom to protect those in my care, and the strength to face whatever trials may come." The lamp's flame cast dancing shadows on the wall, as Sophia remained kneeling, her heart torn between the Christian duty of helping those in need and her fierce instinct to protect her stepdaughter. Outside, a night bird called, its lonely cry echoing across the snow-covered hills. The sound reminded her that even in the darkest night, God's creatures were not alone. From his place by the hearth, Asher stirred slightly in his sleep, mumbling something unintelligible. Miriam's soft breathing came steady and peaceful from her corner of the cabin. These simple sounds of shared life, this unexpected family that had formed in the midst of winter, filled Sophia with both gratitude and apprehension. She remained on her knees, searching her heart for answers while the mountain night wrapped its star-studded blanket around the little cabin. The tracks in the snow might mean nothing, she told herself, or they might mean everything was about to change. Dawn painted the Colorado sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold. Fresh snow sparkled like scattered diamonds across the landscape, untouched, except for a few deer tracks leading toward the creek. Inside the cabin, Sophia stirred the morning's porridge while Miriam set out 3 wooden bowls. "Miss Miriam," Asher said, pulling on his coat, "how would you like to learn something useful today?" Miriam looked up, curiosity brightening her eyes. "What kind of useful?" "The kind that puts meat in the pot," he replied, reaching for a coil of thin rope. "Time you learn to set proper snares for rabbits." "Oh, can I?" Miriam turned to Sophia, hope written across her face. "Please?" Sophia frowned, stirring the porridge with more force than necessary. "It's not proper work for a young lady." "Now, Mrs. Hochstetler," Asher said quietly, Knowing how to feed oneself is proper work for anyone. Besides, he added with a gentle smile, winter's long and rabbits don't care if it's a man or woman who sets the snare. Sophia looked at Miriam's eager expression, remembering how their meat stores had dwindled over the past weeks. The girl had shown such spirit lately, coming out of her shell since Asher's arrival. Perhaps. Very well, she conceded, though worry still pinched at her heart. But stay within sight of the cabin. Miriam's face lit up like sunshine breaking through clouds. She rushed to pull on her heavy coat and mittens, nearly tripping in her excitement. Sophia watched from the cabin window as Asher led Miriam into the woods. He moved carefully, still favoring his healing wound, but his steps were sure in the deep snow. He stopped near a cluster of snow-laden bushes, kneeling to show Miriam something in the powder. Through the glass, Sophia could see him pointing out, tiny. Tracks in the snow, teaching Miriam to read the story they told. The girl nodded eagerly, hanging on his every word. When he demonstrated how to bend the wire into a perfect loop, Miriam's small hands copied his movements with surprising precision. Good. Asher's deep voice carried faintly through the window. You've got clever hands, little one. A strange warmth bloomed in Sophia's chest at the sight of Miriam's proud smile. The girl, who so often shrank from attention, now stood tall, soaking in Asher's praise like a flower turning toward the sun. It stirred something in Sophia, something both sweet and frightening. She turned away from the window, pressing her hands to her apron. These feelings were dangerous. They whispered of hopes she dared not name, of a future that could never be. She was Amish, bound by the Ordnung. Asher was trouble wrapped in kindness, danger cloaked in gentle ways. The morning passed quietly until the sun stood high overhead. Sophia had just finished hanging fresh dishcloths to dry when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her heart stuttered as she recognized the familiar figure riding toward the cabin. Elder Yoder sat straight-backed on his horse, his gray beard catching the winter light. His expression, already stern, darkened further as he caught sight of Asher and Miriam returning from checking their snares. "Sophia Hochstetler," he called out, dismounting stiffly. His voice carried the weight of authority that had often brought comfort. Today, it brought only dread. "Elder Yoder," she greeted him, clasping her hands to still their trembling. "Will thee come inside? I have fresh coffee." "I think not," he replied, his eyes fixed on Asher. "I've come with concern, not for comfort." Asher touched Miriam's shoulder gently. "Why don't you go check that last snare again?" he suggested quietly. "Make sure it's set just right." The girl hesitated, looking between the adults with worried eyes, but did as she was told. Once she was out of earshot, Elder Yoder turned his full attention to Sophia. "Word spreads quickly, even in winter," he said gravely. "Thee harbors an outsider in thy home, a man alone with thee and the child." His disapproval lay heavy in every word. "This is not our way." "He was wounded," Sophia defended. "Would thee have me turn away one in need?" "There are proper channels for charity," Elder Yoder countered. "Proper ways to help those in need while maintaining distance and decorum." He glanced at Asher, who stood silent but watchful. "This arrangement brings questions, dangerous questions." Sophia felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I have done nothing improper." "Perhaps not in thy eyes," the elder said. "But the community sees what it sees. They remember thy unusual situation with the girl." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Thee walks a thin line already, Sophia. This choice will have consequences." The threat lay unspoken, but clear between them. The community's acceptance of Miriam had always been fragile. Now, by taking in Asher, Sophia risked what little tolerance they had earned. "I understand thy concern," she said carefully, "but my conscience is clear before God." Elder Yoder shook his head slowly. "Pray it remains so." He mounted his horse with deliberate movements. "Remember, Sophia, Faith is shown not just in grand gestures, but in daily obedience. They watched him right away, his black coat stark against the snow. Sophia's hands trembled as she smoothed her apron, torn between the familiar pull of community and the fierce certainty that she had done right. "I'm sorry," Asher said quietly, beside her. "I never meant to bring trouble to your door." Before she could respond, Miriam came running back, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "We caught one," she exclaimed, holding up a plump rabbit. "The snare worked just like you said it would." The simple joy in her voice cut through the tension like sunlight through storm clouds. Sophia found herself smiling despite her heavy heart. That evening, they gathered around the table, the rabbit transformed into a humble but satisfying stew. Steam rose from their bowls, carrying the rich scent of herbs from Sophia's garden. Miriam could barely contain her pride as they tasted the first bites. "It's because you showed me exactly where to put the snare," she told Asher earnestly. "Right where the tracks crossed." "You did all the work," he replied, his eyes warm with approval. "You've got a natural talent for reading sign." Sophia watched them, her heart full of conflicting emotions. Here at her table sat an unlikely family, her Amish-raised stepdaughter with her mother's Arapaho features, a wounded mountain man who defended the helpless, and herself, a widow, trying to hold everything together with prayer and determination. The lamp burned low as they finished their meal. Miriam helped clear the dishes, then settled by the fire with her knitting. The quiet click of needles filled the room as Asher took out his knife and whetstone. Sophia found herself watching his hands as he worked the blade against the stone. They were strong hands, capable of violence. He'd admitted as much in his story about the railroad foreman, yet they were also gentle hands that had taught Miriam with endless patience, that split wood for their fire despite his healing wound. The steady scrape of steel against stone matched the rhythm of her thoughts. Asher represented both danger and protection, a threat to her standing in the community, but also a shield against the world's cruelties. Like his knife, he could either harm or help, depending on how he was wielded. The firelight caught the blade's edge as he tested it with his thumb, sharp enough to split a hair, deadly enough to defend a life. Sophia turned back to her mending, but her thoughts remained fixed on the man across the room. This puzzle that God had dropped at her doorstep. This test of faith and conscience that grew more complicated with each passing day. Outside, the wind whispered through pine boughs heavy with snow. Inside, the little family sat in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts while the fire crackled softly in the hearth. The consequences Elder Yoder had promised loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. But for this moment, peace reigned in the cabin, fragile as a snowflake, precious as answered prayer. Dawn broke over the Colorado foothills, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pearl and gold. The storm that had raged for days finally released its grip, leaving behind a pristine blanket of white beneath a pale blue sky. The morning air bit sharp and clean, carrying the promise of a clear winter day. Sophia stood at her cabin door, breathing in the crisp stillness. The world seemed renewed, washed clean by the storm's fury. Behind her, she heard Miriam pulling on her boots while Asher checked the water buckets. "Creek won't be frozen solid," he said, studying the empty containers. "Storm wasn't cold enough for that. But we'll need to break through the surface ice." Sophia nodded, gathering her shawl closer. "We'll all go. Many hands make light work." They set out together, leaving tracks in the virgin snow. Miriam walked between them, her steps light and eager. The creek lay quarter-mile distant, its usual gurgle muffled under a thin sheet of ice. Asher carried the axe to break through, while Sophia and Miriam each held 2 buckets. As they worked, Asher spoke quietly of his years in the mountains. His deep voice carried clearly in the winter air, painting pictures of tall peaks and hidden valleys. He described summers spent tracking elk through wildflower meadows, winters holed up in a small cabin with only his thoughts for company. "After the war," he said, pausing to crack the ice with practiced strokes, I couldn't abide town life anymore. Too many memories. Too many ghosts. He dipped a bucket into the dark water. Mountains don't ask questions. Don't judge a man by anything but his ability to survive. Sophia listened carefully, hearing the weight of unspoken pain in his words. The war had left more than physical scars. She could see it in the way his eyes sometimes went distant, the way he startled at sudden sounds. "Did you never get lonely?" Miriam asked, watching him fill another bucket. A small smile touched his weathered face. "Reckon I did, little one. But loneliness seemed safer than people for a long while." "And now?" Sophia found herself asking. His eyes met hers briefly. "Now I'm not so sure about that anymore." They worked steadily, the routine familiar after days of practice. Miriam helped steady the buckets while Asher and Sophia drew water. The girl chatted about the tracks they passed: rabbit, fox, deer, showing off what she'd learned from Asher's lessons. On the walk back, Asher spoke of his encounters with various mountain folk, trappers, prospectors, native hunters. He described learning to read weather from cloud patterns, to find north without a compass, to make medicine from wild plants. "Learned that last bit from an old Ute woman," he said. "Saved my life when fever took me one winter. Taught me respect for knowledge that doesn't come from books." Sophia noted how he spoke of native people, with quiet respect, acknowledging their humanity and wisdom. So different from the dismissive tone she often heard in town. Back at the cabin, they stored the water and warmed themselves by the fire. Miriam disappeared into her corner, returning with something held behind her back. She approached Asher shyly, producing a carefully knitted scarf in shades of brown and gray. "I made this for you," she said softly, "to thank you for teaching me about the snares." Asher's expression softened as she draped the scarf around his neck. His big hands touched the wool gently. "This is fine work, Miriam." "Much obliged." The girl beamed at his formal thanks, her usual reserve melting away. Sophia watched them, her heart warming at how naturally they had come to trust each other. Later that morning, Sophia prepared for a trip to town. Their flour supply had dwindled dangerously low during the storm. She hesitated before leaving, knowing what awaited her. "I won't be long," she told Asher, who watched her preparations with concerned eyes. "Be careful," he said simply. She nodded, understanding he meant more than just the icy roads. The town lay silent under its blanket of snow, smoke rising straight from chimneys in the still air. Sophia walked purposefully toward the general store, her boots crunching on packed snow. She felt the stairs as she passed, heard the whispers start up behind her. Inside the store, conversation died as she entered. Mrs. Miller, arranging dry goods, turned her back pointedly. Sophia selected her flour with steady hands, refusing to rush despite the hostile atmosphere. As she paid, a woman's voice carried clearly from behind her. "Heathen lover." The words struck like a physical blow, but Sophia kept her spine straight. She thanked the shopkeeper quietly and walked out, holding her dignity around her like a cloak. More whispers followed her down the street. She caught fragments. Harboring that man. Already raising that half-breed. Turning from the faith. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she forced herself to walk steadily, remembering Miriam's face when others scorned her. If her stepdaughter could bear such treatment with grace, so could she. The sun hung low when she finally turned onto the path home. Her arms ached from carrying the flour, but the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the weight of the town's judgment. She spotted Asher before she reached the cabin. He stood in the yard, axe in hand, his stance alert as he watched the road. The new scarf was wrapped around his neck, a touch of softness against his rugged frame. When he saw her, something in his posture relaxed slightly. "Let me take that," he said, reaching for the flour sack. His eyes studied her face. "Rough time in town?" Sophia let him carry the flour inside, where Miriam was setting the table for supper. The familiar domestic scene eased some of her tension, but the morning's encounters still stung. Over bowls of steaming stew, she told them about the whispers, the turned backs, the cutting words. Miriam's face fell, too familiar with such treatment. "They fear what they don't understand," Asher said quietly. His hand reached across the table, stopping just short of touching hers. "Don't let it break you, Sophia. You're stronger than their fear." She looked at him then, really looked, at the way his presence filled the cabin, with a sense of security, at how naturally he fit at their table, as if he'd always belonged there, at the gentleness in his eyes when he spoke to Miriam, and the quiet strength he offered to Sophia herself. Something shifted in her heart like ice breaking up in spring. This man whom she'd dragged in from a snowstorm had become more than just a temporary guest. He represented a choice between safe conformity and dangerous truth, between what was expected and what was right. The evening settled around them peacefully. Miriam worked on another knitting project while Asher told her stories of mountain winters. Sophia sat with her mending, letting their quiet voices wash away the memory of town's cruelty. Outside, stars began to prick through the darkening sky. Inside, the little family drew closer together, finding strength in their shared understanding of what it meant to stand apart, to be judged, to choose love over fear. Sophia's needle flashed in the lamplight as she considered how her life had changed since that stormy night. The path ahead remained uncertain, but she was no longer walking it alone. In accepting Asher and defending Miriam, she had found a different kind of faith, one built on mercy rather than judgment, on courage rather than conformity. The lamplight caught the silver threading through Asher's dark hair as he demonstrated a knitting technique to Miriam. His hands, capable of both violence and tenderness, moved with careful precision. Sophia felt that strange warmth in her chest again, stronger now, impossible to ignore. They were outsiders together, she realized, each carrying different wounds, different burdens, but finding healing in their unlikely fellowship. Whatever tomorrow might bring, tonight they had this: peace, understanding, and the quiet solidarity of hearts that chose love over fear. The first hints of spring whispered through the Colorado foothills. Snow retreated in patches, exposing dark earth beneath. Water trickled constantly as icicles surrendered to the warming sun, turning the yard into a maze of muddy ruts and half-frozen puddles. Sophia knelt in her kitchen garden, testing the soil with practiced fingers. The ground still held winter's chill, but life stirred beneath the surface. She had waited through many seasons for this moment when the earth softened enough to accept new seeds. "Can I plant the peas?" Miriam asked, hovering nearby with a handful of dried seeds clutched carefully in her palm. The girl's cheeks were pink with excitement, her dark braids swinging as she bounced on her toes. "Carefully now," Sophia guided, showing her how to space the seeds along the shallow furrow they had drawn. "Not too close together. They need room to grow." Above them, hammer strikes rang out steadily from the barn roof. Asher worked methodically, replacing worn shingles that the winter storms had loosened. Though his wound had mostly healed, Sophia noticed how he sometimes pressed a hand to his side when he thought no one was looking. "Will the peas grow tall?" Miriam asked, patting soil gently over each seed. "Taller than you, if we give them proper support." Sophia smiled, reaching for the twine they would use to create climbing strings. Everything needs something to lean on while it grows strong. The afternoon sun warmed their backs as they worked. Sophia found herself humming an old hymn, one her mother had taught her for planting time. Miriam joined in, her clear voice carrying the melody while Sophia harmonized softly. The hammer strikes above stopped suddenly. Sophia looked up, catching Asher's alert posture. He had turned toward the road, his whole body tense with watchfulness. A rider approached through the mud, his horse picking its way carefully between the worst ruts. The stranger sat his mount with easy confidence, dressed in the practical gear of a railroad man. His coat was fine leather, his boots well-oiled. Someone who worked more with papers than rails, Sophia guessed. Asher descended the barn roof with careful movements, positioning himself casually near the ladder. But Sophia saw how his hand stayed close to the knife at his belt. The rider reined in at their fence, touching the brim of his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Afternoon, ma'am. Hope I'm not disturbing your planting." "You are welcome to state your business," Sophia replied evenly, standing to place herself between the stranger and Miriam. She kept her tone polite but distant, as she would with any unexpected visitor. "Name's Jeb Carraway. I represent certain railroad interests." His smile didn't reach his eyes as they flicked between Sophia and Asher. "Been asking around about a mountain man. Caused some trouble up north a few weeks back. Thought he might have passed through these parts." Sophia felt Miriam press against her skirts, seeking reassurance. She rested one soil-stained hand on the girl's shoulder. "We see few travelers in winter, Mr. Carraway. The storms keep most sensible folk close to home." "Sensible folk, yes." Carraway's gaze settled on Asher, who had moved closer to the women while staying in the barn's shadow. "Interesting work you're doing there, friend. Don't recall seeing you around before?" "Just helping a widow with repairs," Asher replied. His voice was neutral, but Sophia heard the tension beneath. "Christian charity, you might say." Carraway's laugh held no warmth. "Christian charity? That's right neighborly of you." He shifted in his saddle, making the leather creak. "Funny thing about charity, though. Sometimes it brings trouble to decent folk who'd be better off minding their own business." The threat in his words hung clear in the spring air. Sophia felt Miriam trembling slightly and squeezed her shoulder in silent comfort. "I appreciate your concern for our welfare," Sophia said firmly. "But as you can see, we are quite busy with spring planting. If you have no other business for now." Carraway's gaze drifted to Miriam, lingering with unsettling interest. "Pretty child you have there, ma'am. Be a shame if anything happened to disturb her peace." Asher took a step forward, his hand now openly on his knife hilt. "You've said your piece, Carraway. Best ride on while the light holds." The railroad man's smile widened, showing teeth. "Indeed, I have. Good day to you all." He touched his hat again, wheeled his horse, and rode away at an unhurried pace. They watched until he disappeared around the bend. Only then did Sophia feel her shoulders relax slightly. Miriam remained pressed against her, small fingers clutching her skirt. "Inside," Asher said quietly. "All of us. Now." They abandoned their gardening tools and retreated to the cabin's safety. Sophia busied herself making tea, trying to restore normalcy for Miriam's sake, but her hands shook slightly as she measured the dried leaves. "He was looking for you," she said finally, setting cups on the table. "The railroad man you fought." Asher nodded grimly. "Jeb Carraway, the foreman's right hand. Does his dirty work, keeps his hands clean." He accepted the tea, but didn't drink. "I should go, before they bring more trouble to your door." "No!" Miriam's cry startled them both. She jumped up from her chair, face fierce with sudden tears. "Don't send him away! Please, Mama Sophia, don't make him leave." Sophia gathered the girl close, stroking her hair as she sobbed. "Hush now, Liebchen. Hush." But her own heart clenched at the thought of Asher's departure. These past weeks had changed them all, weaving their lives together in ways she hadn't expected. "The girl's right," Asher said heavily. "Leaving now would only invite them to follow. They'd come back here first, thinking I might return." His hands tightened around the cooling teacup. "You'd have no protection then." Sophia met his eyes across the table, seeing the truth there. Their fates had tangled that snowy night when she dragged him from her porch. Any chance of unraveling those bonds had passed long ago. "Then we face this together," she said quietly. "As a family." Miriam's tears slowed. She raised her head from Sophia's shoulder, hope dawning in her wet eyes. "Really? We can keep him? Despite the gravity of their situation, Sophia couldn't help smiling at the girl's phrasing. He's not a stray kitten, Liebchen. But yes, if he chooses to stay, we will face whatever comes together. As darkness fell, they moved through their evening routine. Sophia prepared a simple supper while Miriam set the table. Asher checked all the window latches, added wood to the fire, and cleaned his knife with methodical care. After Miriam went to bed, Sophia found Asher still awake, keeping watch by the window. Moonlight silvered his profile as he studied the night-dark yard. "You should rest," she said softly, not wanting to wake Miriam. "Sleep comes hard these days." He didn't turn from his vigil, knowing they're out there, watching, waiting. Sophia settled into the chair beside him, her mending in her lap. The familiar motion of needle and thread helped steady her thoughts. What will they do? Nothing tonight. Caraway will report back first, make plans. His voice was low, matter of fact. But they'll come. Men like that can't afford to let defiance go unpunished. Makes others think they can stand up too. Like you did. She glanced at him. For the Arapaho workers. Someone had to. His shoulders tensed at the memory. They'd worked through winter, laying track in bitter cold. When spring came, the foreman claimed they'd broken contract terms, said they didn't deserve full wages, called them savages to their faces. His hand clenched on the windowsill. I've seen too much injustice to stay quiet. Even if speaking up marks you as a target. Sophia thought of her own choice to raise Miriam, to love the child despite her mixed heritage. How that decision had marked them both as outsiders in their own community. Sometimes standing up for what's right means standing alone. You're not alone anymore. Asher turned from the window then, his eyes meeting hers in the dim light. None of us are. The truth of his words settled deep in Sophia's heart. Whatever danger Caraway represented, whatever storms gathered on their horizon, they would weather them together. Their unlikely family, bound by choice rather than blood, had become stronger than any threat. They sat in companionable silence watching the moon sail across the star-strewn sky. Sophia's needle flashed steadily, marking time with tiny stitches, while Asher kept his patient vigil. Outside, spring winds whispered through awakening branches, carrying promises of both growth and change. The April sun climbed higher each day, warming the earth and coaxing new grass from winter-beaten soil. Sophia stood at her cabin window, watching Asher lead Miriam towards the creek, fishing poles balanced on their shoulders. The sight made her heart lift. Miriam skipping ahead in her faded blue dress, Asher's steady stride matching her excited pace. "Mind the mud by the bank," she called after them. "And don't stay too long past noon." Miriam waved back, her face bright with anticipation. "We'll bring home the biggest fish, Mama Sophia. Just wait and see." Sophia settled at her sewing table, threading her needle with practiced ease. The torn shirt in her lap needed mending. Asher had snagged it on a nail while repairing the barn door. Her fingers worked steadily, tiny stitches marching across worn cotton. Through the open window drifted sounds that warmed her more than any spring sunshine. Miriam's clear laughter mingling with Asher's deeper chuckle, their voices carrying across the greening meadow. "Hold the pole steady now," she heard Asher instruct. "That's it. Watch how the line moves in the current." "Like this?" Miriam's question floated back. "Just so. You've got a natural feel for it." Sophia smiled, remembering how withdrawn Miriam had been just months ago. The girl had carried herself like a shadow then, trying to make herself small against the world's judgment. But Asher's patient guidance had awakened something in her, a confidence that grew stronger each day. The morning passed peacefully. Sophia finished mending the shirt and moved on to darning socks, her needle flashing in the strengthening sunlight. She hummed old hymns under her breath, their familiar melodies a comfort. Outside, Meadowlarks trilled their spring songs, and the occasional splash from the creek marked another attempt at catching fish. Just past noon, hurried footsteps approached the cabin. Miriam burst through the door, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Look what we caught." She held up a string of gleaming trout, their scales catching the light. "Asher showed me how to clean them too." "5 fine fish," Sophia praised, setting aside her sewing. "What a feast we'll have tonight." Asher ducked through the doorway, carrying the poles and a bucket of fresh water. His eyes crinkled at the corners as he watched Miriam's pride. "She's a quick study. Caught 3 of them herself." "Did you see how big this one is?" Miriam held up the largest trout. "Asher says it's because I was patient, just like he taught me." Sophia's hands were already reaching for her worn cookbook. "These will taste wonderful, fried with cornmeal. Perhaps we can gather some early watercress to go alongside." They worked together, preparing the evening meal. Miriam set the table with careful attention while Sophia seasoned the fish. Asher split more kindling for the cook stove, the rhythmic thunk of his axe a steady counterpoint to their indoor tasks. The cabin filled with savory aromas and warm conversation. Supper felt different that evening, festive, as if they were celebrating something more than just a successful fishing trip. They lingered at the table after the meal, none of them eager to break the comfortable mood. Finally, Sophia reached for her Bible, its leather cover smooth from years of daily handling. "Shall I read?" she asked, as had become their custom. Miriam nodded eagerly, and Asher settled back in his chair, his expression attentive. Sophia opened to the Book of Psalms, her voice soft but clear in the evening quiet. "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble," she began, but her voice trembled slightly at the words. These passages about faith through trials touched closer to home now, with danger still lurking beyond their peaceful evening. She continued reading, aware of Asher's intense focus. When she finished the psalm, silence held for a moment before he spoke. "I used to know those words," he said quietly. "Before the war." "Before." He trailed off, shadows crossing his face. "Seems like a lifetime ago now." Sophia closed the Bible gently. "Faith isn't gone," she said, meeting his troubled gaze. "Only buried, perhaps. Like seeds under winter snow, waiting for spring." He considered this, turning the thought over like a smooth stone in his mind. "Maybe so. But there's blood on my hands now. Things I've done that can't be undone." "God's mercy is wider than our mistakes," Sophia replied, "and deeper than our regret." Miriam, who had been listening quietly, reached over to touch Asher's scarred hand. "You're a good man," she said with a child's simple certainty. "You helped those Arapaho workers. You teach me things. You protect us." Asher's expression softened as he looked at the girl. "Thank you, little one. That means more than you know." After Miriam went to bed, Sophia and Asher stepped outside to check the fence line. Stars wheeled overhead, in the vast spring sky, their light silvering the meadow grass. They worked together in comfortable silence, testing posts and replacing worn rails. "Been thinking," Asher said finally, as they paused to rest. "About what?" "Comes after, if we make it through this trouble with the railroad men." Sophia leaned against a solid post, waiting for him to continue. "There's land up north, near the mountains. Good water, rich soil. Far enough from towns that folks might live free there." His voice took on a dreaming quality she'd never heard before. "Place where no one gets cheated for their bloodline or their labor. Where a man or woman can build something honest with their own hands." Sophia studied his profile in the starlight, struck by the depth of feeling behind his usually guarded expression. This was more than idle talk. This was a vision he'd carried through his solitary years, a hope he'd never quite abandoned. "It sounds beautiful," she said softly. "It could be." He turned to face her, his eyes earnest in the darkness. "For all of us, if you wanted." The night air seemed to still around them, heavy with possibility. Sophia's heart beat faster as she recognized what he was really offering. Not just a dream of land, but a future together. A true home for their unlikely family. She thought of the days behind them, his patient teaching of Miriam, his steady presence through their shared dangers, the way her own loneliness had gradually given way to something warmer, more hopeful. Like spring thaw after winter's grip, change had come so gradually, she hardly noticed until it was already complete. "We should finish checking the fence," she said finally, but her voice held warmth rather than deflection. There would be time for deeper conversations, for decisions about their future. For now, it was enough to work side by side under the stars, their shadows moving together across the silver-touched grass. They completed their task as the moon rose higher, its light catching the new leaves that had unfurled on the cottonwoods by the creek. From inside the cabin came the soft creak of Miriam turning in her sleep. A night bird called from the forest edge, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote answered. Sophia paused at the cabin door, breathing in the spring night air. Her world had grown larger since that snowy evening when she'd found Asher on her porch. Larger and richer and more complicated. Yet she wouldn't trade it for all the peace her old life had offered. Some risks, she was learning, brought rewards worth any price. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for teaching Miriam today, for making her laugh." Asher nodded, understanding all she wasn't saying. "Thank you for reading tonight, for reminding me there's still light in dark places." They shared a moment of silence, each feeling the weight of changes yet to come. Then, Sophia opened the door, and they stepped back into the warmth of their shared home, where Miriam's peaceful breathing set the rhythm of their evening rest. The cabin settled around them, creaking softly as night deepened. Outside, spring winds whispered promises of renewal, of faith restored, of love growing strong as wilderness flowers pushing through mountain snow. Dawn arrived with a gentle breeze, carrying the first scent of smoke. At first, it seemed like morning mist rising from the creek, but the acrid tang made Sophia's nose twitch as she stood at the cabin door. Her heart lurched when she saw dark smoke billowing from behind the barn. "Asher!" she cried, already running. "The barn's on fire!" Asher burst from the cabin, boots unlaced, shirt half buttoned. His face went hard when he saw the flames licking through the barn's roof slats. Behind him, Miriam appeared in her nightdress, eyes wide with terror. "No!" Miriam's scream pierced the morning air. "The animals!" Sophia's mind raced to their cow, their chickens, the winter's store of hay. Everything they needed to survive, going up in flames. "Get the buckets!" Asher shouted, already sprinting toward the creek. "Form a line!" They scrambled to action. Sophia grabbed every bucket and pail they owned, while Miriam, hands shaking, collected the wash basins. The heat grew intense as they approached the barn, smoke stinging their eyes. Inside, they could hear the frightened lowing of their cow. Asher splashed through the creek, filling 2 buckets at once. "Here." He thrust one into Sophia's hands. She passed it to Miriam, who ran toward the barn's entrance. The girl emptied it on the flames, blocking the door. Steam hissing up in great clouds. Their bucket line moved with desperate speed. Creek to Asher, to Sophia, to Miriam, again and again. Water sloshed over their feet, soaking their clothes. Smoke made them cough and gasp. But they couldn't stop, not with their livestock trapped inside. The cow burst through the smoky doorway, eyes rolling white with fear. Chickens scattered after her, wings flapping in panic. Miriam sobbed with relief, but there was no time to celebrate. "Keep going," Asher urged, passing another bucket. But the fire had too much of a head start. With a tremendous groan, the barn's roof began to sag. Timber crackled and popped like gunshots. "Get back!" Asher grabbed Miriam's arm, yanking her away just as a burning beam crashed down where she'd been standing. They stumbled backward, watching helplessly as their barn collapsed in on itself with a deafening roar. Flames shot skyward, carrying sparks and ash. The heat pressed against their faces like a physical force. Sophia felt tears streaming down her cheeks, cutting clean tracks through the soot that covered her face. When the worst of the collapse was over, Asher circled the burning ruins, his expression darkening. He crouched near some marks in the mud, running his fingers over them. "Horses," he growled. 3, maybe 4 riders. They came in the night. Sophia's legs felt weak. She sank down onto a fallen log, pulling Miriam close. "We must tell Sheriff Barrett. This is deliberate destruction of property." Asher's laugh was bitter. "The sheriff?" He straightened, fists clenched at his sides. "The railroad owns him, same as they own the judge and half the merchants in town. They'll say it was an accident, maybe even try to blame us for it." "But surely," Sophia began. "I've seen how this works." Asher cut her off, his voice hard with old pain. "The law bends for men with money. Always has." They stayed outside for hours, making sure no sparks threatened the cabin. The cow had run off, but Miriam managed to gather most of the chickens into a makeshift pen. The barn continued to smolder, sending up thick columns of smoke that marked their location like a signal flag. By the time evening fell, exhaustion had settled over them like a heavy blanket. They'd saved what they could from the barn's edges, some tools, a few bales of hay, the wagon harness. But the loss was devastating. Without the barn, they'd struggle to store enough food for winter. Without proper shelter, and the animals might not survive. Sophia moved through familiar motions, preparing their evening meal, but her hands trembled. She'd known taking Asher in might bring trouble, but this felt different. This was a message, written in flame and ash. They weren't safe here anymore. They ate in heavy silence. The usual cheerful supper conversation was replaced by the scrape of spoons against bowls. Miriam picked at her food, shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. Finally, the girl broke down completely. She slid from her chair and buried her face in Sophia's lap, crying so hard she could barely breathe. Sophia stroked her hair, murmuring comfort, but her own eyes were wet. Asher watched them from across the table, his face carved in shadows by the firelight. Something shifted in his expression, grief giving way to determination. "I won't let them take anything else from you." He swore softly, the words carrying the weight of an oath. "Not one more thing." Sophia met his gaze across the flickering light. She saw in his eyes the same fierce protectiveness she felt for Miriam, the same readiness to fight for this fragile family they'd built. They moved closer together, drawn by shared loss and shared resolve. Miriam curled up between them on the settle, her tears gradually subsiding into hiccups. Asher's arm stretched along the back, not quite touching Sophia's shoulders but offering silent support. The fire crackled in the hearth, throwing dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the barn's embers still glowed dull red against the darkness. But inside their cabin, 3 hearts beat in defiant unity. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Sophia's hands moved automatically through her mending basket, trying to keep them steady. Every few minutes her eyes strayed to the window, scanning for more riders. The peaceful routine of their days had been shattered, leaving jagged edges of fear and uncertainty. Miriam finally drifted into exhausted sleep, her head heavy against Sophia's shoulder. Tear tracks marked her soot-stained face, and Sophia's heart ached at the sight. This child had already endured so much prejudice and loss. It wasn't fair that she should face more. "We should move her to bed," Sophia whispered. Asher nodded, gently lifting Miriam's slight form. The girl didn't stir as he carried her to the bedroom, tucking her in with a tenderness that made Sophia's throat tight. When he returned, his expression was grim. "They won't stop with the barn?" he said quietly, settling back beside Sophia. "Caraway and his men. They're sending a message. Testing our resolve. What can we do?" Sophia's fingers worried at her apron hem. "We can't fight the whole." "Railroad. No." Asher's jaw tightened. but we can stand our ground. Make it cost them more than they're willing to pay." They sat in silence for a long moment, watching the fire burn down to coals. The loss of the barn hung heavy in the air between them, but something else was growing stronger, a determination that ran deeper than fear. The night pressed close around their cabin, full of unknown threats, but inside, 3 hearts beat as one, bound together by choice and circumstance and something that felt increasingly like love. They had lost their barn, but they had found something far more precious, a family worth fighting for. Through the window, the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles below. Yet in that small cabin, a new kind of strength was taking root, one built on trust and shared sacrifice, on the choice to stand together when the world seemed set against them. Dawn crept over the hills with sullen gray light, matching the heavy mood that filled the cabin. Sophia stood at the window, watching clouds gather thick and low over the mountains. The air felt dense with coming rain, pressing down on her shoulders like a physical weight. Behind her, she heard the soft scrape of Asher's boots on the wooden floor. He moved carefully, still favoring his healing side, as he gathered his few belongings. The small pack of supplies she'd insisted on preparing sat by the door: dried meat, bread, an extra shirt she'd mended. "You don't have to go," Sophia said quietly, not turning from the window. She'd made this argument 3 times since sunrise, but the words felt hollow now. "You know I do." Asher's voice was rough with emotion he tried to hide. "They burned your barn because of me. Next time it could be worse." Sophia's hands clenched in her apron. "The Lord brought you to our door that night. There must be a reason. Maybe the reason was just to keep me alive long enough to warn you." Asher lifted his coat from its peg, the movement slow and deliberate. "These railroad men, they won't stop until they find me. Distance is the only protection I can offer you and Miriam now." At the sound of her name, Miriam emerged from the bedroom, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She'd barely spoken since Asher announced his decision the night before. Now she stood in the doorway, clutching the knitted scarf she'd made him, her small frame rigid with distress. Outside, a borrowed mule stamped impatiently. Their own horse had run off during the barn fire, yet another loss to bear. The morning air carried the lingering smell of wet ash from the barn's remains. Asher shouldered his pack, checking the pistol at his hip, a gesture that made Sophia's heart clench with fear for him. He moved toward the door, then stopped, looking down at Miriam. "Come here, little one," he said softly. Miriam flew across the room and threw herself against him, burying her face in his coat. Her shoulder shook with fresh sobs. Asher wrapped his arms around her, pressing his cheek to the top of her head. For a long moment, he just held her, his eyes closed tight against his own emotion. "You keep practicing those snares I taught you," he murmured, "and mind your mother. She's stronger than anyone knows." Miriam clutched him tighter, shaking her head against his chest. When she spoke, her voice was muffled but fierce. "Please don't go. We can fight them together." "Some fights aren't meant for children to bear." Asher gently detached her arms, kneeling to look her in the eye. "You've got your mother's courage, Miriam. Use it to keep each other safe." He stood, and Sophia saw the cost of it in every line of his body. The man who had arrived at their door half dead in a blizzard now looked equally wounded by having to leave. "Sophia." He turned to her, his voice rough. "I can't repay what you've done for me. Taking me in, tending my wounds, sharing your home." "There is no debt between friends," Sophia said firmly, though her own voice wavered. "Only God's grace flowing through us all." Asher nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Then he straightened his shoulders and moved toward the door. Each step seemed to cost him dearly. On the porch, he paused to look back one last time. The gray morning light caught the silver at his temples, the deep lines around his eyes. Sophia would remember him like this. Strong despite his wounds, honor winning out over desire. Then he was mounting the mule, settling into the borrowed saddle with the ease of long practice. Without another word, he turned the animal's head toward the hills and rode away. The steady clip of hooves grew fainter and fainter, until only the wind remained. Miriam broke free from Sophia's grasp and ran a few steps after him, the scarf still clutched in her hands. "Wait! Your scarf! You forgot your scarf!" But Asher was already too far to hear. They watched him disappear into the trees, his figure growing smaller and smaller until the gray morning swallowed him completely. Sophia gathered Miriam close, feeling the girl's whole body shaking with sobs. "Hush now," she whispered, though her own tears fell freely. "God will guide us all. We must trust in his plan." The day stretched endlessly before them, empty of Asher's steady presence. They moved through their chores like sleepwalkers, feeding the chickens, hauling water, sorting through the meager supplies they'd salvaged from the barn. Every task seemed harder, without his help. Every corner of the cabin echoing with his absence. Evening found them at the table, sharing a simple supper of bread and beans. The silence pressed in around them, made worse by memories of Asher's deep laugh, his quiet stories of mountain life. Miriam pushed her food around her plate, barely eating. "You need your strength," Sophia prompted gently. Miriam shook her head. "I'm not hungry." Her voice was hollow, drained of its usual spirit. After the dishes were cleared, they knelt together by Sophia's bed. The familiar words of prayer offered some comfort, though Sophia's heart ached with fresh petitions. "Lord, watch over him," she whispered. "Guide his path and keep him safe. And give us the strength to bear this separation, if it be your will." Miriam added her own quiet, "Amen," then crawled into bed beside Sophia. Though they usually slept separately tonight, neither wanted to be alone. They lay in the darkness, listening to the wind sigh around the cabin's corners. Days passed with aching slowness. They fell into new rhythms, adapting to life without Asher's help. Sophia's hands grew rougher from extra work, while Miriam's eyes constantly strayed to the hills, searching for a familiar silhouette. Each morning brought new challenges. They had to devise ways to store their remaining supplies without the barn, to protect the chickens from weather and predators. Every task reminded them of Asher's absent strength, his clever solutions to problems. At night, Sophia's dreams were filled with his voice, promising safety and protection. She would wake with tears on her cheeks, the memory of his presence so vivid it made her chest ache. But she refused to let grief overwhelm her. There was too much work to be done, too many needs requiring her attention. One morning, about a week after Asher's departure, Sophia sat by the window mending one of Miriam's dresses. The familiar motion of needle and thread helped calm her thoughts, though her eyes frequently strayed to the hills. Miriam sat nearby, attempting to knit another scarf. Her movements were listless, lacking their usual enthusiasm. Suddenly, she looked up, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "He'll come back," she whispered, with such certainty that Sophia's hands stilled in their work. Sophia studied her daughter's face, seeing not just hope there, but conviction. Something in Miriam's quiet confidence made her own heart lift slightly. "What makes you so sure?" she asked softly. Miriam's fingers traced the pattern of her knitting. "Because he belongs with us now. God brought him here for a reason, like you said, and God doesn't make mistakes." Sophia couldn't find words to respond. She reached out and squeezed Miriam's hand, sharing strength and drawing it in return. Together, they watched the hills where Asher had disappeared, while the gray morning slowly brightened toward noon. The cabin felt emptier without him, each corner holding memories of his presence. The chair where he'd sat telling stories, the axe he'd used to split wood, the place by the fire where they'd first nursed him back to health. But beneath the ache of separation, a deeper truth remained. Love, once given, could not be so easily undone by distance. The empty days stretched like shadows across the cabin floor. Sophia's muscles ached from work that used to be shared among 3 pairs of hands. Each morning brought new challenges without Asher's steady presence and capable strength. Dawn painted the hills gold as Sophia and Miriam made their way to the creek, wooden buckets swinging between them. The path felt longer now, every step reminding them of Asher's absence. He had always carried the heaviest loads, telling stories to make the work lighter. "Careful on those rocks," Sophia cautioned as Miriam climbed down to the water's edge. The spring thaw had made the creek banks treacherous with mud. They worked in silence, dipping their buckets into the clear water. The sound of splashing echoed off the hills, making Sophia glance nervously over her shoulder. Every noise seemed sharper now, more threatening. "I miss his stories," Miriam said softly, watching ripples spread across the water's surface. Sophia touched her daughter's shoulder. "I know, child. I do too." The walk back was harder, buckets heavy with water that sloshed against their legs. Halfway home, they had to stop and rest, setting their loads carefully on level ground. Sophia's arms trembled from the strain. After the water was stored, they turned to mending fences damaged by winter storms. Sophia struggled with the heavy posts while Miriam handed her tools. The work that Asher had made look easy now took them twice as long, leaving their hands blistered and raw. "Mind the wire," Sophia warned as Miriam helped stretch a length of fencing. "It can snap back fierce if it breaks." They worked through the morning, the sun climbing higher overhead. Every so often, Sophia would pause to scan the horizon, watching for riders. The burned remains of their barn stood as a stark reminder of the danger that lurked beyond their peaceful valley. Near midday, hoofbeats echoed across the meadow. Sophia's heart jumped into her throat as she grabbed Miriam's arm, pulling her toward the cabin. They barely made it inside before 5 riders appeared around the bend, led by Jeb Carraway's familiar figure. "Get behind me," Sophia whispered, positioning herself in the doorway. Her fingers found her Bible on the nearby shelf, gripping it like a shield. The riders pulled up in a cloud of dust, their horses stamping restlessly. Jeb's smile didn't reach his cold eyes as he touched the brim of his hat in mock politeness. "Widow Hochstetler," he drawled, "seems your mountain man friend has abandoned you." Sophia lifted her chin. "God has not abandoned us, Mr. Carraway. That's all that matters." Jeb's smile hardened. "Speaking of matters, we've come about the girl." His gaze shifted to where Miriam stood, partially hidden behind Sophia. "Railroad's got plans for this valley. Can't have complications from those with questionable claims to the land." "Miriam is my daughter," Sophia said firmly. "Legal and proper by marriage and my late husband's will." One of the other riders spat in the dirt. "Half-breed got no rights among plain folk, everyone knows that." Sophia's grip tightened on her Bible. "The Lord sees no such divisions among his children." "Listen here," Jeb said, his pleasant tone dropping away. "That girl's mother was Arapaho. Makes her Indian in the eyes of the law, no right to inherit property. Best thing for everyone is if she comes with us. We'll see she's placed somewhere appropriate." Behind her, Sophia felt Miriam trembling, but when she spoke, her voice was steady as stone. "You have no authority here, Mr. Carraway. This is my home and my daughter. I answer to God's law before man's." The riders shifted in their saddles, several hands drifting toward gun belts. But Jeb held up a restraining hand, his smile turning ugly. "Brave words, widow. But your God ain't been much help lately, has he? Barn burning was just the start. Shame if something worse happened while you slept. 'The Lord is my shepherd,'" Sophia quoted clearly, her voice carrying across the yard. "I shall not want. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." "Pretty words won't stop what's coming," Jeb sneered. He wheeled his horse around, the others following suit. "We'll be back. And next time, we won't waste time talking." They rode off in another cloud of dust, leaving the air thick with unspoken threats. Sophia's legs trembled as she shut and bolted the door. When she turned, Miriam flew into her arms, finally letting her tears flow. "Hush now," Sophia soothed, stroking her daughter's hair. "They're gone for now. We're safe." But as evening drew near, fear crept in with the shadows. Sophia moved through their normal routine with forced calm, preparing supper, tidying up, reading from the Bible. She made sure all the windows were secured, checking the locks twice. After Miriam fell into uneasy sleep, Sophia sat at the table with a single lamp burning. She pulled out her husband's will from its hiding place in her Bible, fingers tracing the familiar words that named Miriam his heir. The paper was wearing thin at the creases, but the ink remained clear and strong. In the lamp's dim light, Sophia's tears finally came. She wept silently, one hand pressed to her mouth to muffle any sound that might wake Miriam. Tears fell for her fear, for the hatred in men's hearts, for Asher's absence when they needed him most. When the storm of weeping passed, Sophia wiped her eyes and reached for paper and pen. Her hand shook slightly as she began writing to the Amish elders. "Respected friends, I write to you in a time of great trial. Though I stand shunned from our community, I must appeal to your sense of justice and Christian charity. My daughter Miriam faces grave threat from men who would steal her birthright through violence." She wrote carefully, choosing each word with prayer. Though hope of help felt slim, she had to try every path before her. The letter filled 2 pages, ending with a plea for the elders to remember God's commands about caring for widows and orphans. As she sealed the letter, Sophia glanced at Miriam's sleeping form. The girl looked so young in sleep, her face peaceful despite the day's terrors. Sophia's heart ached with fierce love and protection. "Lord," she whispered into the quiet room, "give me strength to be what she needs, to stand firm when my knees would buckle, to keep faith when fear would shake it." The lamp flickered low as Sophia read again from her Bible, drawing comfort from familiar verses. Without Asher's solid presence beside them, the night felt vast and full of shadows. But as she read, her spirit steadied. They were not truly alone. God's presence filled even the darkest corners with quiet strength. Still, she found her eyes straying off into the window, searching the starlit hills where Asher had disappeared. His absence felt like a physical ache in her chest. She missed his quiet strength, his gentle way with Miriam, the way his presence had made their small cabin feel truly like home. "Watch over him too, Lord," she prayed softly. "Whatever path you've set him on, guide his steps, and if it be your will." She paused, struggling with the depth of her longing. "If it be your will, bring him back to us." The night deepened around the cabin. Sophia stayed awake long into the dark hours, keeping vigil while her daughter slept. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of their courage and faith. But for now, she let the peace of Scripture wash over her, preparing her heart for whatever lay ahead. 2 days dragged past like molasses in winter. Sophia kept Miriam close, both of them working within sight of the cabin's walls. The spring air held a bitter chill that morning as they gathered eggs, their breath forming small clouds in the dawn light. A distant rumble made Sophia freeze, her basket half full. Hoofbeats, many horses moving fast. "Inside," she whispered urgently, pushing Miriam toward the cabin. "Now!" They barely reached the door when the riders thundered into view. Jeb Carraway led them, his face twisted in an ugly smile. This time, they didn't stop at the yard's edge. They dismounted as one, boots hitting the dirt with heavy thuds. Sophia slammed the door, throwing the bolt. Her hands trembled as she grabbed Miriam, pulling her toward the back room. But before they could reach it, the door shuddered under heavy blows. "Open up, widow," Jeb's voice carried through the wood. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Sophia's eyes darted around the cabin. The windows were secured, but they wouldn't hold long against determined men. Her gaze fell on the kitchen knife lying on the table. The door frame splintered. Miriam screamed as the men burst through, filling the small cabin with their bulk and the stench of trail dust. Sophia snatched up the knife, backing away. She held it before her with shaking hands, trying to remember how Asher had gripped his blade. "Stay back," she warned, her voice trembling but firm. "God is watching." Jeb laughed, the sound cold as winter wind. "God ain't here, woman. Just us sinners." He stepped forward, seemingly unconcerned by the knife. Now, hand over the girl, and we'll leave you be." "Never." Sophia shifted to keep herself between the men and Miriam. "She's my daughter." "Last chance," Jeb growled. His hand shot out, catching Sophia's wrist in an iron grip. She gasped in pain as he twisted, forcing the knife from her fingers. It clattered to the floor. Behind her, Miriam screamed again as one of the other men grabbed her. The sound pierced Sophia's heart like a blade. "No!" She fought wildly, but Jeb shoved her aside. She stumbled, striking her hip against the table. "Please!" "She's just a child." Suddenly, new hoofbeats thundered through the yard, many horses moving fast and sure. The men froze, heads turning toward the sound. A familiar voice roared from outside. "Caraway!" Sophia's heart leaped. Asher. The railroad men rushed to the windows. Through her tears, Sophia saw their faces pale. She struggled to her feet, pulling Miriam free in the confusion. Boots thudded on the porch. Asher filled the doorway, his face dark with rage. Behind him stood several Arapaho elders, their expressions stern and dignified despite the early hour. "Let them go," Asher growled, his hand resting on his knife hilt. Jeb sneered, though Sophia noticed he'd backed away from her. "This ain't your business, mountain man. Railroad's got rights here." "Rights?" One of the elders stepped forward, his voice deep and steady. "Like the rights you denied our people? The wages stolen from honest work?" Another elder spoke, his English clear and cutting. "We remember every promise broken, every dollar cheated from our sons and brothers." Asher's voice carried through the cabin like thunder. "Tell them, Caraway. Tell them how your foreman kept 2 ledgers, how he paid Indian workers half wages, then pocketed the difference." "Meow." "That's a lie." Jeb's hand moved toward his gun. "Touch that iron and die," Asher said softly. More Arapaho riders appeared in the doorway, their faces grim. One of the elders raised his hand. "The people have long memories, railroad man. We know your foreman's crimes. Touch these women, and you will answer not just to the law, but to tribal justice." Jeb's eyes darted around the cabin, counting odds. His men shifted uneasily, clearly not liking how the numbers had turned. "This ain't over," he spat finally. Railroad won't stand for proof of theft and fraud," Asher cut in. "How much you reckon those ledgers would be worth to a newspaper? Or a federal marshal?" Sophia saw the moment Jeb's nerve broke. He jerked his head at his men. "Mount up," he snarled. "Ain't worth bloodshed over one half-breed kid." They backed out slowly, hands raised. Sophia heard them scrambling onto their horses, then the thunder of hooves fading into distance. The silence that followed felt holy as a prayer. Sophia's legs gave way. She sank to her knees, pulling Miriam close, breathing in the familiar scent of her daughter's hair. Tears flowed freely now, tears of relief, of gratitude, of release from fear. Strong hands gripped her shoulders, steadying her. She looked up into Asher's weathered face, seeing the worry in his eyes. "You're hurt," he said softly, touching her wrist where Jeb had grabbed her. "Just bruised," she whispered. Her voice broke. "You came back. Couldn't stay away." His thumb brushed away a tear from her cheek. "Rode straight to the Arapaho camp when I left. Figured we'd need witnesses to the truth." One of the elders stepped forward, his face kind. "We have watched this valley long, daughter. Seen how you care for the child of 2 peoples with a mother's heart. The people do not forget such kindness." Miriam pressed closer to Sophia, staring at the elders with wide eyes. One of them smiled at her, speaking gentle words in Arapaho. Though she didn't understand the language, Sophia felt her daughter relax slightly. "They say she has her mother's eyes," Asher translated quietly, "and her adopted mother's courage." Sophia's throat tightened. She leaned into Asher's strength, no longer ashamed to need his support. His arm came around her shoulders, warm and solid as the cabin's walls. The elders spoke briefly among themselves, then turned to Asher. He listened, nodding occasionally, then translated for Sophia. "They'll send word to their council. Make sure the railroad knows that any trouble here will bring tribal response." His voice softened. "You won't face this alone anymore." Sophia looked around her cabin, at the splintered door, the overturned chairs, the scattered eggs from their dropped basket. Yet somehow, the space felt safer than ever before. Miriam still trembled in her arms, but the girl's tears had stopped. "Thank you," she said to the elders, hoping they could hear her heart's gratitude beyond the simple words, "for standing with us, for believing truth." The oldest elder inclined his head. "Truth needs brave hearts to speak it. Brave hearts need strong hands to guard them." He looked meaningfully at Asher. "Some wolves walk on two legs. Better to face them as family than alone." With quiet dignity, the elders took their leave. Several remained posted as sentries around the valley, their presence a clear warning to any who might return with ill intent. Asher helped Sophia to her feet, keeping one hand at her elbow until she found her balance. Together, they set about restoring order to the cabin. Miriam helped right the chairs, while Sophia swept up broken eggs. The work was healing, bringing normalcy back to their shattered morning. When the door hung straight again on its repaired hinges, Sophia felt strength returning to her limbs. She touched the rough wood, remembering how close they'd come to losing everything. "I didn't know if you'd come back," she admitted softly. Asher paused in his work. "Leaving was the hardest thing I've done," he said. "Thought distance would keep you safe. But then I realized, running from evil never stops it. Standing together might." Sophia looked at him, really looked at the man who'd stumbled wounded onto her porch that snowy night. The mountain man who'd taught Miriam to laugh again, who'd brought allies to stand with them when all seemed lost. "God sends help in unexpected ways," she whispered. His calloused hand covered hers where it rested on the door frame. The touch was gentle, full of promise and protection. "I reckon he does at that," Asher agreed softly. That evening, the cabin filled with warmth and fellowship. The Arapaho elders gathered around Sophia's hearth, sharing dried meat and stories that stretched back generations. Their presence transformed the simple space into something sacred. "Justice is like the mighty oak," one elder said, his weathered hands gesturing as he spoke. "It grows not from begging, but from those who plant themselves firm and fight for what is right." Sophia nodded, her heart full. "Thank you for standing with us today, for showing Miriam that her heritage is something to cherish." The firelight danced across Miriam's face as she sat cross-legged near the elders, drinking in their words. For the first time since the morning's violence, she smiled, pride shining in her eyes as they spoke of her mother's people. "To would make a stronger tree," another elder said, looking kindly at the girl. "Amish ways, Arapaho heart, both are gifts from the Creator." As the evening deepened, the elders shared more wisdom, speaking of patience and perseverance. Their words filled the cabin like a blessing, washing away the last shadows of fear. After they departed, Sophia and Asher sat together by the dying fire. The quiet between them felt comfortable, like a well-worn quilt. "I feared you wouldn't return," Sophia admitted softly, watching the embers glow. Asher's face was thoughtful in the firelight. "When I rode out, I thought I was protecting you both." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "And I realize family isn't something to run from. It's something to stand and fight for." Their eyes met across the flickering light. Sophia saw in his gaze all the unspoken things: protection, belonging, possibility. Hope bloomed in her chest, stronger than the morning glory vines that climbed her garden fence. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks up the chimney like tiny stars. In that moment, Sophia knew with certainty that God had led them all to this place, this time, this healing circle of acceptance and love. The days that followed brought healing with each sunrise. Asher's strong hands made quick work of the broken fences, hammering posts deep into the softening spring earth. The steady rhythm of his work echoed across the meadow, a sound of restoration. In the garden, Sophia knelt in the rich soil, carefully setting tender seedlings into neat rows. Her prayers mixed with the earth as she worked, thankful for each new beginning. Nearby, Miriam gathered fallen branches with a newfound spring in her step. The girl hummed as she worked, no longer glancing fearfully over her shoulder. Change came slowly to the community, like ice melting in the spring thaw. First one neighbor, then another began to visit, bringing gifts of lumber and nails. They had seen the railroad men's cruelty with their own eyes, and it had stirred something in their hearts. "We were wrong to turn away," Mrs. Miller said softly, offering a basket of fresh eggs. God's love knows no boundaries. One afternoon, Elder Yoder's wagon creaked up the path. Sophia's hands trembled as she wiped them on her apron, but his face held none of its former sternness. "Perhaps," he said slowly, studying the rebuilt fence posts, "I have been too rigid in my understanding of God's mercy." His weathered hands clasped his hat. "The Lord's grace is wider than we sometimes allow." Tears spilled down Sophia's cheeks at his words. Years of isolation crumbled like old bread, and she felt God's presence warm as sunlight. That evening they gathered around the table, Sophia, Asher, and Miriam. Steam rose from golden cornbread and fresh-caught trout. Miriam's laughter sparkled like creek water as Asher told one of his gentle jokes. The cabin felt full of light and life. Sophia bowed her head, her heart overflowing with gratitude. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, "for bringing abundance after want and joy after sorrow." The quiet sounds of their shared meal rose like hymns in the gathering dusk. Summer painted the Colorado foothills in vibrant hues. Purple lupines and golden sunflowers dotted the meadows, swaying in the warm breeze. The morning sun had barely climbed over the eastern ridge when Asher helped Sophia and Miriam into the wagon for their trip to town. The wheels creaked along the dusty road, and Miriam's eyes sparkled with excitement. She sat between them on the wooden seat, her plain dress freshly pressed for the occasion. As they rolled down the main street, some townspeople still turned away with scowls, but others tipped their hats or offered small waves. At the general store, Mrs. Thompson greeted them at the counter. "Good morning, Miriam," she said warmly, sliding a peppermint stick across the counter. "Your garden vegetables have been mighty fine this season." Miriam's smile could have lit up the darkest mine shaft. She clutched the candy carefully in her small hand, looking up at Sophia for permission before accepting the treat. Later that afternoon, Sophia guided Miriam through the weathered door of the Amish meeting house. Their feet made soft sounds on the wooden floor as they found seats in the back row. Sophia held her breath, waiting for the whispers or cold shoulders that had driven them away before. But no one rose to send them home. The peaceful silence wrapped around them like a familiar quilt, and tears of gratitude welled in Sophia's eyes. As the sun settled into evening gold, they spread a quilt on the grass behind their cabin. Crickets chirped their evening songs while they shared fresh bread and spring berries. Stars began appearing one by one in the deepening blue sky. Asher looked at Miriam thoughtfully. "You're growing stronger every day," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Strong enough to stand up for what's yours, just like your mama." Sophia's heart quickened at his words. Without hesitation, she reached across the quilt and laid her hand over his weathered one. Their eyes met in the twilight, a silent promise passing between them as clear as the evening star. Autumn's first chill swept across the foothills as golden leaves drifted past the cabin windows. Inside, warmth and the rich aroma of fresh-baked bread filled every corner. Sophia worked the dough with practiced hands while Miriam hummed an old Arapaho melody nearby, her voice sweet and clear. The door creaked open, bringing a gust of crisp air as Asher stepped inside, arms laden with split wood. His smile, no longer guarded, brightened the room. At the supper table, he bowed his head, his deep voice steady. "Lord, we thank you for keeping us safe, for giving us this family." Sophia's eyes welled with tears as she squeezed Miriam's hand. Through the window, the first snowflakes began their quiet dance. They gathered close by the lamp's gentle glow, shadows dancing on the log walls. Asher turned to Sophia, his voice soft with meaning. "I don't mind." The words held all his heart now, full of devotion. Outside, smoke curled from the chimney into the darkening sky. Light spilled from the windows into the gathering dusk, a beacon of hope. Within those walls, a family forged in faith and tested by fire had found their lasting peace. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.